The idea of the Bristol Housing Festival, I suppose it evolved. It didn't immediately happen, but I was in a situation where I was leaving one job, thinking about what to do next, and was really struck by, I suppose, the challenge of housing. As a non-housing expert, looking at the reality of the system of housing that we have, particularly in Bristol, the homelessness situation, and this lack of hope that for so many people there was no sense that at any moment they'd better afford or buy a home. And so I think into that space, there was a desire to do something, and so with a group of friends to start with, actually we wanted to do something to support refugees. Quite small scale, quite small in terms of numbers, but there was just this desire to say, well, what can we do to help? And as that vision kind of started to grow and you start to get sucked into the issues and the challenges around housing, I think it became very evident there were two things in play. One was this whole story about modern methods of construction that had been there as an opportunity, as a potentially quite a disruptive force for good in the industry, but also that to do something small scale, you actually do a huge amount of work and effort, but why could you not put that same energy into something that's slightly bigger vision and more about engaging a broader group of people effectively. And so as that conversation was happening and we started to sort of meet with people, we started to meet with the council and suggest ideas. I was also introduced to a guy called Lord Way, who's a Tory peer, and he really challenged me directly about that small vision and said, look, you're not the housing expert, but what about if you can curate a vision and draw the experts around that? So to really look about what are the shared objectives of housing, what are the frustrations, the pain points of housing, and what can we do to coalesce around those and to dream together, but then to do. So the big challenge is the last thing the housing industry needs is another talking shop. What we really wanted to start to think about and to deliver was how can you have a think and do mentality. So you've got the courage to lead, the courage to try things, but actually also as you're doing that, recognising that you're not going to get it right first time, but what you can do is make sure you've got progress. So the idea then was a question really about how can we create a story in Bristol that is engendering hope in housing, where there's real things happening, but that's around a broader canopy of drawing lots of people together to tell a positive story. We launched Housing Festival in October 2018 publicly, but of course, like with any of those kind of projects, there's a backstory to that. So I've actually been working on this as a project full-time since, for over 3 years now. I trained as a lawyer in London, trained then and then worked in practice in corporate finance as a lawyer. I left that actually principally because it was a great training, great experience, but I think I had a real desire to do something that had for me, more direct evidence of social good, social transformation. Moved into the charity sector and was a chief executive for a charity in London for a while, working particularly with young people around training in public speaking, giving them more confidence to articulate and get their messages across. Same time then, family's growing, so we have a son and then we have twin girls, and like a lot of people, we just couldn't make London life work, particularly working in the charity sector. My wife works at the NHS. And we ended up in Bristol and we fell in love with the city. It's a wonderful city. We've been here about 8 years now, and it's been a real joy to be here. And the first job I had actually in Bristol then was back into law. So it felt like a bit of a reversal, but the thing that I loved was that I went back in as a chief executive of barristers' chambers, not as a practicing lawyer. And that's all around building vision, purpose, consensus, often with a quite disparate group of people, so you got the challenge that there's lots of different ideas and lots of views about how things should be done. So it's an incredibly challenging, rewarding job for me, and I did that for 6 years. But then on leaving that, there was then this step change into, well, what can I do as a kind of direct expression of my desire to see social transformation for good, and seeing Bristol as an amazing city, but then this problem of such diversity in terms of opportunity and the disparity of wealth. So that, again, seeing housing as being such a fulcrum of all of those issues. Bristol has this incredible identity, I think, as a place. It's an independently minded, energetic, in some ways quite revolutionary city. It doesn't mind pioneering, it doesn't mind leading. That's the kind of flavour. And you look at the backstory of Bristol, and there's this incredible kind of legacy of a pioneering spirit that comes out of it. And of course, that's been hugely successful for the city. And we see all of this industry, creativity, and wealth that gets generated partly on the back of that pioneering spirit. But it also has, as we know, it's a city that wealth is not equally shared. And Bristol has some of the worst examples in Europe of social poverty in terms of some of the stats that come out. And all too often it feels that as a city grows and becomes successful, the housing issue becomes more complex, becomes more acute, it becomes more of a divisive issue. And any mayor, whether it's Marvin or any other mayor coming into power in that position, housing is going to be one of those key challenges. And of course, into that now we face that housing crisis around the supply of housing, the affordability of housing, the ability for people to get quality housing for them to live and for their families. We've now got the climate crisis, so how do we build that housing in a way that is more sustainable, more responsible in terms of its carbon usage, landfill issues, and the construction industry grappling with that. But of course, there's a cost issue there. And for those in the industry, there's also this construction skills crisis issue around we do not have enough people coming through into the industry, into the construction industry to build the houses that we need. So why Bristol? I think because Bristol can politically and from a community basis lead. It's prepared to do things differently. It then became really important as well that we do something not as an island. So that one of the problems with any bigger vision is it has to be built in a collaborative, very invitational way. And so we were keen as well to get the support and work with the combined authority, because of course then you can start to think more strategically. The joint spatial plan is an example where, although it failed, the ambition was to work more strategically as a region. And it's easy to criticise why those things fail, but actually the truth is that's the kind of thinking that we need, that strategic approach to housing, to tackle that social inequality and build the housing the city needs and the region needs, not just the kind of housing that the development cycle is currently too often giving us. Bristol is a city of festivals, and the reality for us now is we think about the festival in the concept of maybe a weekend of activity and socialisation and drinking, but the reality is that festivals can also be incredibly important concepts that bring cultural change. So things like the Festival of Britain, that they weren't just a show to sort of celebrate, but they actually, as a result of the legacy of that show, things changed. People saw different ways of doing things. They actually even influenced the way people dress and that kind of. So I think that was the mindset of what could you do with a festival of housing, where one of the kind of real challenges that we see, particularly in housing, but it's in other areas as well in our public life, is this breakdown of trust. And so often we see that sort of siloed mentality. So how could we create a story, an event, a festival, where you could bring the public into a space? Because as stakeholders in the city about housing, it's key that they are educated, informed, consulted, engaged, and drawn into that story, because ultimately it's their city. But how can we do that in the same space where we can engage the professionals in the industry, and in that same space that we can engage the political and the public process, so that we almost are trying to create a story where these conversations aren't happening in a segregated way, but you're bringing people together to actually realise we have more in common, we have more shared objectives than we realise. And the truth is that for many of us, when we read the press, we only really come across bad news in housing. We either hear a story about an incompetent local authority, a terrible planning decision, or we hear a story about a terrible developer who's taken advantage. And that's a difficult environment to build trust in, because we don't hear the good news stories. We don't celebrate when actually there's an incredible scheme that's been working for 3 years and has built a huge amount of good quality homes that are sustainable and actually provided affordable housing for the city. So how can we have that canopy over the city where we're celebrating good news, we're creating an impetus and opportunity to do things differently, and we're building collaborations around new ways of building homes that ultimately have to be about the future of creating a new supply and a more diverse supply of housing for the United Kingdom. Why 5 years? I think the truth is that whenever you come up with a concept of something like a festival, the danger is if you don't give it a time frame, it become a very sort of, well, every year we'll have an event, every year we'll talk about what might have happened and showcase certain things, but there needs urgency. The housing crisis is an urgency to it. The climate crisis, there's an urgency to it. And the ambition with putting a time frame around it was almost to hold ourselves accountable, to say, look, if we can't get things happening in the real world, with learning how those models might be scaled and replicated, if we can't get that happening in 5 years, then we need to accept we failed. The climate crisis and the housing crisis, there's a human and social cost to this that is brutal and dark, and I think that the 5 years was almost a sort of a plea to us and the other people we're partnered with to say, this has to look like something on the ground in real terms, and housing doesn't happen quickly. You know, anybody that's got any experience even doing their own extension will know that you know, issues to do with planning and housing, they are complicated, they're difficult, and they do take time. But we can't allow time to rule how quickly these changes happen. So 5 years was what can we get done in 5 years in a city where the hope and the ambition is that some of the things that have happened can become then the more normal operational system for the industry, where there are standards and objectives that can be scaled and replicated. And the truth is, if we can't get that done in 5 years, we have to really examine ourselves, you know, as an organisation, the Housing Festival, but I think as a city as well, to say what will it take to see that change. So time is not on our side. There's an urgency, and that was the commitment to the 5 years. The question of success is interesting as an enabler. So our role as the festival is that we will never own land. We will never own a single property. We're there to try and broker and encourage and create a pathway, I suppose, where you're bringing those experts together. You're bringing the right parties together where things can happen. So on one level, I think about success on the sort of the macro and the micro. On the micro, for me, the thing that, you know, that drives me is the thought of people having homes that otherwise would not have had homes. And when I think about the human cost of people that do not have secure housing, or for families with children where they're in temporary accommodation, or for people who have the genuine fear of can they afford their rent that month and could be evicted, you know, the human cost of that is so real. So on one level, on a micro level, success is that some of those people, whether it's 1 or 50, are now living in more secure accommodation, and those people have rediscovered hope, rediscovered a way of living that they are more hopeful and more secure in their own home environment. And you know, I'll be honest, that's enough. You know, we don't have to change the world. We accept that no one can do that by themselves. And so in the macro, we're ambitious, I suppose, to see change, but we accept that we can't make that happen. We can only draw others in and go on a journey with other people. But the macro ambition is that there is a genuine opportunity to rethink and redesign and resequence the way that housing is delivered in the UK. And modern methods of construction, which is essentially what we're talking about, the ability of moving the way that we build houses from a traditional build construction with brick and block on a field, or on a car park, that kind of thing, to more manufactured homes where a lot of the assembly is done in a dry, warm environment in a factory. So it's a completely different process. That completely different process, I do think, has the opportunity of bringing really positive change to the housing industry. And there are many good reasons and complicated reasons why it hasn't taken off in the United Kingdom. So the big vision is that somehow that Bristol as a city and Bristol Housing Festival as a partner of what's happening in housing in the city can help create that new story where we see a big shift in the way housing is delivered that allows us to have a greater quality and a greater sustainability and tackle some of the affordability issues in our housing system in the United Kingdom. When we start to think about what would it look like to be able to bring to the public and into that public space a number of homes and pop them up on the waterfront, and then create this story around this invitation to the city to engage in our housing crisis, and you know, use that as a platform to speak about the values of hope and unity and generosity, and into that space, you know, talk about sustainability of housing, talk about the complexity of our homelessness issues, talk about the complexity of affordability, and then as a construct of that to have this draw of these houses, which looks amazing on the waterfront. We didn't think, if I'm honest, because it had never been done before, or know if people would come. It's a bit like, you know, hosting a party at home and you sort of suddenly realise it's 8 o'clock and no one's turned up and you get a bit nervous. And we were amazed. I mean, I think the fact that we had over 6,500 people that turned up, the fact that we had a huge number of the general public. I mean, who doesn't find it interesting going around homes? I mean, we're all kind of interested in, they're such a big part of our life, you know, how we live and how we do life, and people were genuinely interested. And I think on the whole, we're really impressed with the quality. But it wasn't just the public. We had a whole host of local authorities coming, because what we realised later was that this isn't a normal thing. There's not many places you can go and see such different types of this manufactured homes in one place. So I think we were really delighted and genuinely surprised about the scale of impact that it had. And I think became this thing of how do you gather momentum to see change. There are always going to be two elements for us. And I think the first is how can we understand, explain and share the kind of technical, because with any housing project there is a whole challenge around, particularly as we start to learn how to use modern manufactured housing. The technical challenges are very real, and the industry is wanting to learn, wanting to understand, wanting to engage. A lot of the issue, of course, is around money. How can a piece of land be made viable? Viability meaning how can it work from an economic perspective? So any project, has that technical story, technical learning, technical sharing. But the other thing, and I suppose maybe the thing that the construction industry is not so good at, is then the people story. Houses and homes are for people. Houses and homes build communities. And the truth is that a lot of our construction industry at the moment, what their model is that they build those homes and they sell them and then they move away because their job is done. So this notion of placemaking is very much around how can we create a place that people can live and function and grow their families into a community, and that's great. But when they go, who creates that culture of community? What is the story of those people and their lived experience there? And so for us, that's the next part of the story, is we really want to learn how to make the story of housing always about people, that people never get forgotten, that the element of community never gets forgotten. And that is about collaboration, because the person that builds the house may not be on the ground in 5 years' time, but the people will be. ZPods is due to open quite soon, and the thought of partnering with the YMCA and the council and seeing keys being given to people that otherwise would not have had a secure home, people that were at risk of homelessness or have experienced homelessness, that's a day I can't wait to see happen. And I think what I love about, again, thinking about that technical story and the human story, that's a great example where, the ZPod scheme will be the first scheme in the UK where a council has given over a car park to build housing above a car park. And I know that can be contentious, I appreciate that. But on the other hand, we're talking here about a different model of creating zero carbon housing, to use air rights, because the issue with affordability housing is about the land cost, not so much about the build cost. And so it feels like when we think about the future of transport and the future of cars, this could be a part of that solution. But the human story is the other element to this. So those 9 homes, or those 11 homes, 9 of them are going to be given over to a mix of the YMCA and the council. And I love the fact that what we've done is we've built a partnership so that when those people move in, there will also be people to help them. So we're not, again, just giving them the key, but some of those people will have come out of quite difficult circumstances. So the idea is that the YMCA will be commissioned and partnering to build community, and then 2 of the houses will be allocated to younger key workers. And in return for, I suppose, a slightly lower rent, they will be asked to invest in those young people to kind of create an element of community and mentoring. So what we hope is that we don't just have this story of housing, but we have a story of how we're really supporting and enabling people in the city to get that secure housing and then rebuild their lives and move on with community, because it is about the both and. From October 2018, when this was an idea, could this be done? We've now got to the point where working again with the council, working with a host of partners led by YTKO, we've got an Innovate UK bid. And that Innovate UK bid is a really exciting project to look again about how can we enable a different supply of housing in the United Kingdom, and how can a city be a key catalyst, how can Bristol be a key catalyst to making that happen. And so there are now these 9 different projects happening in the city, and what I love about it is that they are deliberately broad. So we've got from sort of the full, what we call volumetric housing, which is where you've sort of the people like Butlook or LNG Modular, where these are built in a factory so they can be very energy efficient, sustainable homes. I'm excited about that, but we've also now got projects that are what we call panelised systems or SIP systems, so you can get into much more difficult spaces. So full volumetric is great on certain sites, it won't work in other areas, and there's a big invitation here to look at how you really engage brownfield sites in the city centre. So some of the projects we're looking at are looking at garage sites, derelict, abandoned garage sites that are a real problem for fly tipping. How can we use this technology in housing to unlock those sites and create really good sustainable homes? And then right through to, crucially, these local businesses, small, medium enterprises in Bristol who are working with their communities, people who are doing the really crucial bit of building housing with and in community. What I love about this whole project, so working with people like Noel West Media Centre and Snug, is they're critical to this ecosystem of housing. And so what I love about the Innovate UK bid is, yes, it's going to deliver, we hope, something like 450 homes across the city. And yes, we hope that they will each be highly successful projects in their own right. It's recognising that there's a need for that diversity of supply. It's not about looking for one answer. And that kind of puts Bristol in a really interesting position that we can then use those 9 projects to really learn. Each one is going to create a lot of learning around the technical challenges. And then from that we can build again about creating, we hope in partnership, solutions to allow those to be scalable and replicable. So yeah, we've got the first scheme, or one of the first schemes happening with keys to be handed over. So Launchpad was last year, and then moving on to ZPods this year, and then a pipeline coming through the Innovate UK bid. So there's a lot moving, and I hope there'll be a lot to celebrate. I think the other thing we've seen that's happened with the festival is it's also become a bit of a lightning rod for Bristol. So there are opportunities now that are happening in Bristol because Bristol is being perceived as a place that can make these things happen. We are approached regularly now by other local authorities saying, but how did you make that happen? And so the idea is we'll pull together quite significant and detailed technical lessons learned reports that we can share and give away, because the idea is, if this is a good idea, if it works, if we can demonstrate the learning and catch the data of why this is really good quality housing and understand the lived experience of those people, and those people are saying, yeah, this has been great for us, then we can help other people replicate and build. So we've had great support from the council, great support from WHECA. We've now got an element of funding from the Innovate UK bid as well as part of that package, working with the council there. And the truth is that we'll then discover how we get the next part of the funding. And I think that the sort of posture of this whole experience has been, we think it's the right thing to do, we'll commit to it, and then hopefully we demonstrate the value of what we're doing, and we'll build ways of just continuing. This has never been about making money or about sort of personal success. The ambition has always been that we see real change in the real world. I think we are going to see an increasing speed of change in the way that housing is delivered in the UK, and successive governments nationally have been talking about the need to increase the supply of housing, and whatever your view on that, there is a reality that we do not have enough homes for people to live, and that again has an impact on price. MMC, modern methods, arguably can be a new way of bringing that supply. Now, as markets change and sort of the new becomes more established, then I think that becomes potentially quite a powerful force for positive disruption. And I think that's what we will see. We will see a growing transition, both in the way that the new entrants will be delivering housing, but I think that will have an impact. And we're already seeing that. We're already seeing some existing house builders starting to engage with ways of building more sustainably, faster on site, because of course so much of the cost and the viability is the challenge of the actual construction build process and the time that it takes to build. So I think, yeah, there could be a fairly significant shift in that supply chain in the UK, and one of the things we're really excited about the festival is the concept of the Social Value Act. So how do we move the discussion and the practice of commissioning housing from not what's the cost, what's the initial capital outlay, to what's the best value. And of course things like sustainability, our carbon, the density of our housing, so much of that isn't really about what's the cost, but it's about what's the long-term value. So we're increasingly seeing housing providers talk about the lifetime cost of that house. What energy does it take to insulate it and keep it warm or keep it cool in the summer? If you look at just the cost, it's very difficult to engage with that. But the Social Value Act allows you to start to look at local jobs and the sustainability of the housing, the impact on the environment, the impact on the clean air. And I think that's going to be a really significant change as, I suppose, the wisdom that we build into our housing becomes more and more of a critical driver. I think one of the things we've learned, or one of the things we've observed around enabling innovation, is this political environment which is very, in a Twitter environment, it's very easy to be criticised, or for a nuanced message to be simplified into a binary good or bad. And it's very difficult to try things. It's very difficult to take initiative, because you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, kind of thing. And I think one of the things that we've really observed is that we do need leadership, and we do need courage. And innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum. The problem that when I first started to look at housing, and particularly look at the manufactured housing, you could go off to some incredible housing expos, and you would see in a room this incredible technology of these housing solutions that are zero carbon and highly energy efficient, and you're looking thinking, but why is this not happening? And it doesn't happen because you have this sort of siloed environment of the industry, the academia, and the politicians, and they've got very different drivers. And yet actually, if we can coalesce around a series of key objectives and strategic objectives, you can start to break down some of those silos. But what you still need is the courage to say, well, we will try that, we will go first, in a safe way, in a responsible way, but almost to not wait for the pack. And it was interesting even with ZPods that credit to the council, because a lot of other councils had looked at that and said, that's a really interesting idea, we'd love to try that. Who's done it before? And I think one of the things that we want to celebrate is this courage to try, because the urgency and the cost and the brokenness of the existing system means that we are in a place where it's almost no longer excusable to just keep doing what we've done. And the gift is that there are now opportunities to try the new. COVID-19 has only exacerbated that. It's only shone a light on the brokenness and the disparity of our current model. And so the political need, the human need, the social need, the community need, the city need to say, actually, we can do different. And those different will be around, how do we tell a story of community? How can we build sustainable homes? How can we tackle our affordability crisis? We can't ignore any of these complicated, interconnected challenges, because if we rush off in one direction to fix just the housing numbers, we'll end up with a whole load of unintended consequences in another area. So this ability to collaborate, to share, to learn, to try is predicated on the ability to have courage to try and to go first. And I think that, huge courage again to Bristol, that other people are saying, well done to Bristol for at least trying. And the grace, I suppose, to say, well, if it's not perfect first time, but it is progress, we need to learn how to celebrate that, to allow that political story, to allow that city story to evolve and develop.